Hi there guys. In this video we're going to have a look at this somewhat vintage shotgun shell trimmer. I picked this up a number of years ago at a gun show. There was a gentleman who had a table and he had a bunch of old stuff that came from a closed down business. And I'm guessing this is probably 40 or 50 years old, even though it was still sort of brand new in the packaging when I got it. You can see the plastic is kind of a brown Bakelite type plastic, I believe. Certainly looks like Bakelite to me, and nobody's made anything out of Bakelite for a good long time, so very simple little device. This one's actually in 16 gauge. I think we can, you see down inside the hole there it's marked 16. At the time he had 16 and 12 gauge trimmers, and I was not very smart. I only bought the one in 16. I don't know why I didn't get a 12 gauge one, but this can be made do for 12 gauge, even though it's got this post here which is sort of sized to fit inside a 16 gauge cell. These trimmers were made primarily for to kind of recycle paper hulls that got frayed at the front, because usually paper hulls, this is a once fired paper hull so it's not suffering from the problem, but paper hulls will get burnt and frayed at the front end when they're loaded and fired a few times, and quite often they can be sort of recycled or reused by trimming off a portion of the front and crimping them further back. So that's kind of what this trimmer was designed to do. So it also works on plastic hulls as well. You just have to be a little more careful with it because plastic is a little more slippery. But it can also be used to trim hulls down to shorter lengths. Now this is a 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge shell, one of those paper Federals. If you have an older gun which is shorter chambered, you can use a tool like this to shorten your shells up so you can load a shell appropriate for your chamber length. Say you have a 2.5 inch European gun or a 2 inch European gun, you can use it to trim those down. And also you can use it to trim shells with very unusable crimp sections, like this old IVI Imperial hull. These had a heat sealed crimp, and it leaves you with this rather nasty looking crimp on the top here, and you can use a trimmer like this to cut that portion off and use the shell for a shorter length. And you can set up a standard loader to crimp a shorter shell if you use a spacer underneath it in most cases, or you can use a roll crimper. And a lot of people also will just glue a top card over in lieu of doing a proper fold or roll crimp. So I'll give you a demonstration of how this little thing works. It's pretty simple. There's just two pieces, basically two pieces. There's a rotating top part here and the bottom, and they're held together with a brass nut which is inset into the back here with a screw to hold it in place, and in behind here is kind of a razor blade style of cutter which rotates over and pinches up against the shell. So basically you just hold the shell in here, push the top part over so that the blade comes into contact with the shell, and rotate the shell around, and the razor blade portion will cut through the hull. And it's better to do this a little more gently than too aggressively, because you tend to end up cutting a spiral if you do this too harshly. As you can see, we've cut off a portion of the hull quite cleanly there. We end up with that little ring of paper cut off. And if you're going to make a shorter shell, you're probably going to end up making a couple of cuts depending upon the length of shell that you started off with. You may be working with say a 3-inch shell or a 3.5 inch shell. One other thing that this kind of cutter is handy for, if you want to make a roll crimp, it's very difficult to make a roll crimp on a hull which has previously been fold crimped. So if you've got some shells which are longer than what you want, say you want to make a rifled slug load and you want to put a roll crimp on it in a 2 3/4 inch size case, you can take a 3-inch case, trim off the crimped portion, and that'll give you a nice clean, unmessed with case to put your roll crimp on, because it's almost impossible to roll crimp a previously fold crimped case. So anyway, it does a reasonably good job. It's somewhat dependent upon the care and skill of the operator, because if you don't hold the case very flat against this surface here, if you kind of wobble the case back and forth, you'll end up cutting kind of a spiral. This is not perfectly flat. I didn't do an exactly perfect job on it, but that would be certainly close enough to get you in the ballpark of a nice neat trim. Certainly a lot better than what you can do kind of by hand. I've seen several things on the internet where people have made their own shell trimmers, and some of them are fairly ingenious, but they take up a fair bit of room to store. This is a nice small thing. It's almost the size of a, kind of like a cigar cutter actually, very similar type of thing. I believe this one is made in Italy, judging by that name on it. And if any of you have any further information about what brand this may be, it'd be kind of interesting to hear from you. So let's try this little tool out on one of these rather nasty looking heat sealed crimped Imperial IVI shells. These are kind of hard to trim straight because you can see that they're frayed and the top portion sticks up kind of unevenly, and that makes it difficult to hold the hull squarely against the tool. It's also hard to get the thing in there in the first place. So we've got it in there, and then the big trick now is just to hold it kind of at 90 degrees while we rotate it, which is easier said than done because of the rather frayed crimp. But we'll give it a go. It probably won't be terribly even. Not bad though. That came out pretty good. That's the first cut. Normally, to make these into a 2.5 shell, you're going to take a couple of peelings off these, which is the downside of this type of tool compared to one that is adjustable, because if you had an adjustable a tool that adjusts for how much you cut off, you could make one cut and have it all done kind of in the one go. Save yourself a couple of extra cuts. Don't think this is going to turn out perfectly. It feels like it slipped a bit on me. Yeah, it's not too bad. We got a little bit of an overlap there, but certainly better than what we started with. And that'd be a good start if you want to make a black powder shell for an older black powder gun with a shorter chamber. Good way to get rid of the crimp, shorten the shell up. Like I said, you can either fold crimp that or roll crimp that, or sometimes people just glue a top card over the top of the whole thing and make do with that. Anyway, there's a look at that little old device. Hope somebody found that interesting. We'll talk to you in the next video.